Hey everyone, and welcome to Behind the Mask. I'm one of your co-hosts, EJ, and joining me today are my friends Lori.
Hey.
And T.
Hello.
This is episode 3. We're calling it The Mask of Communication. Communication is the way that we share ourselves with the world. This comes in many forms, from written or spoken words, or even through our body language or the tone of our voice. We do have a lot to talk about, so let's get started. But first, we wanted to remind you that anything discussed here is not to be used as a replacement for conversations with your own doctors, therapists, psychologists, or other medical professionals. Tina, why don't you kind of share a little bit about what healthy communication looks like?
Okay, so when we're talking about communication, we're talking about a couple of different things. First of all, we're talking about, verbal versus nonverbal. And then we're also talking about communication styles, so to speak. And, I think first it's really important to understand what's the purpose of communication. So when you guys think of communication, what do you think about?
Well, I think that it's a way to express feelings, to get across an opinion, to be heard. So those are the things that come to mind when I think of communication.
Yeah, I kind of think same thing, and I just it's communications, how we kind of portray ourselves to the world, like it's what we share.
Absolutely. It's definitely all of those things. It's also to get things, like we communicate when we have wants or needs as well. So, and that's an important piece of what communication styles are. But before I talk about that, I want to kind of talk about verbal versus nonverbal. When we're engaging in conversation, it's easy to think of the verbal part. That's the words we use, and whether it's written or spoken. And then a part of that is also listening. And I think sometimes, honestly, it feels like that part gets forgotten, is that sometimes we have to stop and listen in order to have good communication.
Right. My dad always said when I was a kid that you can't listen if your mouth's
open. Wow. I was thinking that I didn't realize how important communication was until I had my stroke.
Oh, that's a good point.
And I remember even as I began to work with a therapist and get my speech back and all of that, my greatest fear ever since then has been losing that ability again. Like it's constantly something that I think about, which I honestly, I think I took it for granted. Like and I've always been, or at least I've been told that I'm a good communicator and that I speak well. I don't mind speaking in public, and I don't, I've been in theater and, teaching and counseling situations, and I've always had such a good grasp of, the English language and how to use it. And so when I couldn't, in the way that we all just assume is something that we can do, that was really kind of scary for me. So
I would imagine it was especially scary because not only could you not communicate the big thoughts and, be eloquent and, perform in how you communicate with others and reaching those higher order things, you also couldn't get your basic needs met. Like, how were you supposed to be able to communicate when you were hurting or needed something from someone?
Right. Well, and the other thing was that, and I was so grateful for my good friend Emily and my caregiver Layla, because I couldn't, because of my past, having people randomly touch me was so traumatic. And once they saw, I was in the hospital bed, and I remember that Emily was like, everybody back away from her. She's crying, Mm-hmm. I couldn't, it was just, I had no control of anything. And I just couldn't, get that across. And it was very traumatic for me. You're right. I couldn't get across little things, nevertheless big things, and
But you did. So that's a great segue
right?
into nonverbal communication. You engaged in nonverbal communication, and she was able to receive it and understand it.
It was so beautiful. Yes. And she did. She got it. Oh, thank you. That's the positive. Yes.
Yep.
She did get it. Yes.
So that's nonverbal communication. So that's any of our communications that we do that is not involving words themselves. And so that includes crying, which is part of that. And I'm sure there were facial expressions and body language, how you held your body, how you responded to the touch. She was able to pick up on that and use what she knew of you to be able to receive your communication and translate it.
Yeah, it was amazing. I was very grateful that she was there. So
absolutely. So I think EJ, you were starting to say something.
Yeah, I was just thinking, like communication is healthy communication is so important. I mean, it's the way our whole world works, and you can't, no matter what you do, like you said, it's like just to have our wants and needs met involves communication from like the bare minimum. Like in some way we have to communicate, even with sometimes we have to communicate with ourselves.
Absolutely. And something we just kind of alluded to here when we were figuring out the technical difficulties, and I said no bueno. That's another piece of our communication, is if we even speak the same language.
Right.
And so sometimes that can be where communication breaks down, is along those areas of not just the actual language spoken, but culture. Whether we come from this, even if we all speak English, if I went down south, I might not understand a word that's being said, because the whole, not just the accent, but the mannerisms, etc. All of that can look a lot different.
Well, and and just in general, like words mean different things in different areas.
Absolutely.
And I even know, like, I took Spanish for 5 years through high school and college, and my teacher was in college was from Spain, and she said in Spain, the word in Mexico for corn actually means shoe in Spain.
Which is
interesting.
Some words that are slightly different, and they're pronounced differently, so then they mean something different.
Right.
So most people, even speaking like Spanish, can communicate just like in English, but then there's some words that mean something different, or the context can be taken differently.
Well, and I think it's been said too that English is probably, if it isn't your first language, is one of the most difficult for that reason. Mm-hmm. Because we can say the word cool and we can mean like, we're hip and we're rad, or we can mean we're cold, or we can mean any number of things, or we can say
cool
just
also
so many
means
things.
Aloof.
Right. It there's so many different things, and you have to take it in context with the whole sentence that's surrounding it, all the other words around it to try to differentiate exactly what it means.
So talking about different languages kind of reminds me of a funny story. At least I find it funny, so that's really what counts. But so when I took Spanish in college. I took French in high school and Spanish in college, and a little bit of German in high school as well. But anyway, I really love languages, so I was excited to be able to take Spanish. And one of our first main assignments was to write a paragraph describing our classroom as if we were in grade school. And I had met a friend who was from Mexico, and he offered to help me learn some of this. And so I was so excited because I got a really good grade on this assignment. And I showed it to him, being so proud, and he read it, and he got a very confused look on his face. And he asked me, well, what were you trying to do here? So slowly my heart just kind of sank, and I was like, well, I explained to him, and he just smiled, and he said, well, you did well. You wrote like you were in the first grade. I'm like, success.
Oh my goodness. That's awesome. I love it.
And, I was just thinking, speaking of like languages and stuff, like I'm teaching myself Japanese, and there's a thing as a culture, or in Japan, it's very common when two people meet up, if they're not friends and they're just business associates, they will each offer each other a business card first and bow, and that's their sign of like this. It's their introduction to the person that they're meeting with. And I just think like a lot of people wouldn't know that, Because
Right.
in America, our traditional thing is to shake somebody's hand when you first meet them. Not in COVID times,
Right.
In the general scheme of things, we would shake their hand. But in Japan, it's they bow and they hand over their business card, and whoever's business card is the top is how they feel is the most senior or the most so if I was meeting somebody that's higher up than me, I would put my business card underneath. So just think like communication, like you're talking about cultures and different things.
Absolutely.
So like if you go to Japan and you want to meet, everybody from like a delivery driver all the way up to a CEO of a company, that's how they introduce themselves to somebody new. Whereas here in the U.S., we have different ways of doing that. So I just think like culture is a huge thing.
Makes me wonder how they used to greet each other before business cards, because that's relatively new. But anyway, but that's a really great point, and there's even differences between age groups, and different things like that. So there's so many ways and different places that communication can break down, and so that's one of the things that we have to juggle when we're attempting to communicate, and that's without any of the big breakdowns.
Right.
And I think, a healthy communicator is somebody who can pick up on the nonverbal and the verbal clues.
Absolutely.
That's and like this, obviously we're going to talk more about it here in a little bit, but I know for me, like I'm terrible with certain communication, but I recognize that, like I know I'm not good. And I know Lori's seen me sit for like a half an hour trying to write a text message. And I've read it to, does this sound okay? Yeah. Does this sound
Talk about it. Talk about a spot where communication can really fall apart is text messaging. Autocorrect is my enemy.
Oh, man. Yes, between autocorrect and just, like, somebody accidentally hitting the all caps, and then you send them a message and it's, like, all caps, and they think you're yelling at them, and it's just chat lingo.
Or you sent the wrong emoji, or you didn't send enough emojis, or
you only sent an emoji and you were asking a question, so like, why did they just send me a thumbs up?
I was
my question.
Yeah, I was thinking, I was texting a friend a while back, and I always, like most people that know me, I always send emojis. I'm very emotional, and I want to show that I'm emotional. And so I always have a little heart or a smiley face or a wink or a something, And I don't know what happened, but I think I was really busy, and I didn't have time. And I sent a response to this girlfriend. There were no emojis in it.
And you didn't send emojis.
No.
And she thought something
She
was wrong.
totally did. She was texting me back like, is everything okay? Are you all right? Who is this? Like, I was like,
9 chances out of 10, if you get a message from Lori and you've haven't talked with her for a while, you get a wink and a yellow heart from her.
Yep, that's right. A wink and a yellow heart.
Usual go-tos.
Those are my kind of standards, But yeah, so I was like, oh, why would you think anything was wrong? She goes, Lori, that text above was not you. And I was like, I looked at it and I was like, oh, I'm fine. Everything is good. I was just really busy.
Let me update with more emojis.
Right. I think I sent like 10. I go, okay, this is you.
Right. Yeah. Which, since having the technology and getting social media and more technology on our phones and communication, it's really challenging to keep up with all that.
Definitely.
I mean, there's been times I will look at somebody and I'll say LOL. I'm like, what?
OMG.
But it's like, right, I know. All those things. It's funny.
Or I'll look at somebody and say laugh out loud.
Yes. And you're like, what did I just say?
ROFL just doesn't work the same when you say it out loud like that.
Yeah.
Oh, that's funny. That's funny.
Which kind of, is those who communicate with those platforms have had to do extra work to, like, I know for me, because I do enjoy social media, I've had to remind myself sometimes, okay, Aaron, you're communicating on Twitter or you're communicating on Instagram. What do and don't you do? in a normal text message, and so it's like I have that extra like moment of I have to remind myself how I communicate.
Absolutely.
Or how in this platform. And there's some people that don't understand what platform they're on, and they don't understand. So then that's where it comes from, the unhealthy communication side of it.
So, kind of talking about this stuff, it reminds me as well that sometimes what we have to remember when we're communicating with people is what space we're in. And it's so easy to misread, even in healthy communication, a situation because of our own assumptions. So, for example, let's say someone's walking down the street and you know this person and you get all excited and you wave at them, but they don't wave back. What is your first thought?
Ouch.
They hate me.
Right. But what you don't know is they didn't see you.
Right.
And so it's really, that's just, like I said, normal circumstances. All these different things can go wrong.
Yeah. Which I guess is a perfect segue into our next segment. What happens to the brain when it goes through trauma?
So the reason it's so important to consider people who might be under a lot of stress or are responding from a what we call trauma brain, or what I call trauma brain, is that it impacts how they communicate and how you communicate with, and whether you're going to get the outcomes you're looking for or not. So to talk about the brain and when it's in trauma, I like to do an illustration with folks, and it seems to work okay over audio like this, but it's making a fist and placing your thumb under your fingers, and that represents your brain. I hope most of our brains are bigger than that, but the jury's out.
I hope so.
So if you were to, so that front part of your brain where the front part of your knuckles are at, that's the prefrontal cortex. And what happens in that area of the brain is where we spend our time deciding what we're going to do next. It's our planning brain. It takes information from your whole life and makes decisions based on that knowledge. And it also is what controls your emotions and keeps it in check and controls your behavior, helps you decide what you're going to do. And if you were to lift those fingers up where your thumb is at, that area of your brain is in your temporal lobe, and that is where the amygdala sits. And the amygdala is our alarm bell. It's the part of the brain, its job is to recognize whether there's danger or not. It doesn't have to know whether the danger is real or not. It just has to say, oh, this might be dangerous. And so it goes off and sends out an alert to your whole body saying, we may need to fight or run or freeze or submit. So let's get ready for that. And that means our heart starts pounding fast and we start breathing faster so we can get oxygenated blood to where it needs to be in the body. And where it doesn't need to be is our digestive system and our reproductive system and our bladder and whatnot. And that's why when people get frightened, they may need to pee because the bladder says, oh, I'm not needed. Dump this. So also, we don't get blood flow to the front part of the brain. So we're no longer able to really think things through. We're just all reaction.
So we're not being reasonable anymore.
Right. There is no reason. We're just reacting. And in that same area of the brain as the amygdala is our one type of memory, some of our memories, especially emotional memories, because our emotions are also in the same area of the brain. So they're getting plenty of blood flow. And so the information is all getting processed through that. Now, there are two other areas that are fairly important when you're communicating, whether it's from a trauma point or not. And one is the Broca's area, and that's what helps us get our thoughts into words, spoken words and communication. The Wernicke's area is the area of the brain that takes in language, takes in the words, and deciphers it and makes meaning out of it. And those two areas of the brain are also affected when you're under a lot of stress or experiencing a trauma or a flashback trauma. And
okay, so when you say affected,
they're not getting the blood flow.
Okay.
So they're not
So then
working.
the one that's supposed to take in the information is like shut down.
Right.
And the one that's supposed to communicate it isn't, like you're frozen.
Yeah, it's shut down as well. It's not working right.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just wanted to clarify, make sure I understood.
Oh, absolutely. So when you take all that into consideration, you get people who are under a lot of stress or experiencing trauma or the flashback of a trauma, and that amygdala goes off, and there's not a lot of communicating happening.
Right. I remember when the boys and I were first here, when we first got here, and, we, unfortunately, were victims of domestic violence when we got here. And every time we'd be driving around, one of the things, it was interesting because it was kind of a universal one for all of us. So we were driving to the store together. We that was the other thing. Normally we would have separated, done things differently, right? But in the beginning, it was like none of us wanted to leave the side of the other one. It was like, if I'm with them, it won't be as bad, or we'll be together, or, whatever. That's the way our brains were operating. But one of the things was that triggered all three of us was anybody in a hard hat and one of those orange vests or whatever. And, which, if you can imagine, they're out there way more than you think they are. There's traffic workers and, people in buildings and just all over the place, And so just seeing that orange jacket and a hard hat sent all three of us into, we all got short of breath. We were,
Yep.
My youngest would start crying, and, and my oldest one would get, clenched fists, and, he'd be upset. And I was like, I can't breathe. And then every one of us is looking at this person, making it sure that it's not who we think it is. And it was just this very, it was one of the few that was kind of a response that all three of us had.
Right. Well,
and yeah,
that makes a lot of sense, because one of the things that comes out of trauma, that's a symptom of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, is that hypervigilance. So you're always on alert, always on alert, always on alert. There,
my head was on a swivel.
Right, which means your amygdala is constantly going, constantly going. Then, on top of that, another piece of that is avoiding anything that is a reminder.
Yes.
So it can be a color, it can be an item, it can be a voice, a song. It could be so many different things that represents that trauma.
I avoid country things. I avoid country music. I avoid cowboys. I avoid anything to do with the country.
And then when you can't avoid it, you get triggered. And then that reminder triggers you, and your amygdala can't tell whether the danger is real or not. All it knows, it just says danger. And so you react as if you were there again. And it is just as real as it was when it happened. And
it's so good to hear you say that, out loud, because you, honestly, I don't know about others, but, you just feel as if you've gone a little crazy, and you're so out of sorts, and you just cannot find up and down and sideways. Right.
And to the observer, you look crazy.
Like I was, this is true. This is so true. Sadly true.
So I'm going to share something I've probably never shared with anyone before. 20 years ago, and I know it was 20 years ago because we just had the 20th anniversary of the Nisqually earthquake here in Western Washington. And I was a junior in high school that year. And I remember because I was in my gym class that day. And I was just come back in from the field. We had been out on the field, the soccer field, playing football and stuff. And I'd been playing football with some of the guys, and I remember, just like most guys would do, they skid their knee, they wipe it off, and they move on with their game and whatever. And one of the guys went and gave me a high five because I threw a touchdown, and he had just wiped his scraped at me on his pants from his hand and gave me a high five with the same hand. And then we had the earthquake that day, just after that. So already going through that trauma, like, for the next 6 months, I was so OCD and germophobic.
So your brain made a connection. Yep. And that's not uncommon. And
to this day, that's why I don't like red things.
Interesting.
Exactly.
Because red is blood to me. The only thing I can tolerate red is my car.
Interesting.
That's why, literally, when I buy a pack of colored pens, like pens or markers, I throw away the red one.
Wow.
So what?
That's why 90 chances out of 10, Lori, whenever you're around, I hate red pens.
And I love red.
So what happened, EJ, is that because of the part of the brain that's online during a trauma is all emotional memory, it doesn't have details, like it doesn't track details like time and reason, and you know what I'm saying? It doesn't give it those meanings. All it attaches is the emotional meanings. And so you're then, after the trauma, your brain's just sitting there trying to make sense of this unfinished memory. And so that's very common.
Because I didn't really get a chance to process through all that. Because we had the earthquake, and, it was only a 6.8. And I say, it's a 6.8. But, up here, we don't get them that frequently. So it was a little concerning and stuff. So there was a lot to work through. And it was just like that, February, so kind of end of school year. By the end of the school year, I was just really having stuff. And then I had I lost my one of my grandmothers passed away. So I just had a lot of trauma that year. So it just progressively got worse, but I didn't really click. And now, I'm tolerating things like my aunt, my dad's sister, got into getting the family wearing those red and black buffalo shirts. And so I'll throw that on once in a while, so I don't mind that now. That that combination. But, I'm slowly, okay, Erin. And I remember, as crazy as it sounds, all that stuff was a trigger to kind of start that. And I had, OCD and germophobia issues later for other things. And my psychologist at the time was like, you kind of have, the checking and the OCD tendencies are coming out as a stress reliever for all of that. And when my mom passed away, the complete opposite happened. Stuff that I wouldn't let people touch me or hug me. I wouldn't shake hands. I was going through gallons of hand sanitizer a week. And now I don't barely use it. Granted, with COVID I do. But, yeah, it was I had a trigger that caused it all. And then, the trigger of losing my mom, it snapped my head into place. And I was like, okay, you really got to, it's time to put this on. Put your brain on track.
So what that comes out of is the fact that when we're experiencing trauma, it's usually around events that are out of our control. And that's what OCD is all about, is trying to make sense and get control of the uncontrollable.
I am so glad you said that, because last couple of years, as I've been sicker and I've had less control, I found myself to be far more, negative or stressed or, touchy about how things are done and why they're done that way. And, I think it's because I do feel it's the only way I still have some kind of control, since my body doesn't seem to be in my control. So, at least not at the time being. So,
yeah, and then my control was using hand sanitizer all the time, because I thought I could control what comes into my body, I could control the germs that come at me. Well, now it's whatever. There's so many germs out in the world. And I'm super grateful for my psychologist when I had him, because he told me, you kind of also with that was the what if, well, what if this happens? He goes, so what? So he's like, whenever you think, what if something's going to happen? He says, so what? So what if it happens? He's like, you can't control everything in the world. And and I'm so grateful for the last, maybe 6 years or so, So I lost my mom like 6.5 years ago, and I know like it's been like I've been struggling, having lost her, but it's like life is different now. Like I kind of gave up some of that control because I gave it to God, and that's so free.
Absolutely. Well, one of the things I founding skills. Where are you right now? And I had an interesting lesson in that myself recently. I got to do a training with one of the leading, trauma psychologists in the field. And one of the things he talked about, and now this is a room full of mental health professionals, so we all should have known better when he asked this question. But we did not, and it took a long time for him to get it through our heads. But his question was, am I in danger? And of course, we're all like, well, yeah, that light could come down on your head, or a car could come crashing through that window off that busy street. And I mean, you could trip over that cord. And he kept asking, he goes, but am I in danger right now? We just could not get it. And he goes, if that is so hard for you to understand, imagine how hard it is for your clients who've experienced trauma. To them, that danger is very real and present.
Yes, it is. It definitely feels that way anyway. And
it does.
I was thinking out loud, like, I mean, I know time helps, right? I know developing new habits and things. What are some of the other ways that we can get ourselves out of that being so easily triggered? Because I don't personally, in my opinion, I think there's always going to be certain things that trigger me, but how do we get to that point where we can function within a day? We can have a conversation, we can communicate more healthily without being so easily triggered. Maybe I'll have some thoughts on how we don't get triggered so often, or how we begin to control that situation, and what exactly that looks like.
So when we're talking about, there's a couple different things. First of all, if you're dealing with PTSD or anxiety or depression or any of those things that impact how you communicate and what it's like for you to communicate, definitely I would suggest, finding a counselor or therapist or a psychologist, etc. And, get help in that way, because they can definitely go into far more detail than I can do here. But just some quick tips. First of all, breathe.
Amen.
So
just breathe.
And really, I remember when I was in college and we were learning about these different things. And they were, your whole life you hear people like, well, just breathe. And it's like, well, duh, I am breathing.
Right.
And I'd roll my eyes and, I'd hear people say, well, take nice, slow, deep breaths. And again, I'd roll my eyes, be like, okay, whatever. I don't have time for this. So what would have worked if people would explain to me then what I know now is, what are you doing when you're panicking? What are you doing when you're stressed? What are you doing when you're in a trauma or being triggered of a trauma?
You're often taking very short, quick breaths.
And you're
right, exactly.
Your breath.
Exactly. So that's, so therefore you're not getting really oxygen saturated blood to your brain. And because the amygdala's job is to get you breathing faster so it can get oxygen out faster, but it's not really good oxygen. As a matter of fact, there's a lot of carbon dioxide in there and whatnot.
Interesting.
So if you take nice, slow, deep breaths, it does two things. It gets really oxygen-rich blood flowing, and it's a way of grounding, because then you're telling your amygdala there's no emergency here, because that's not what we do if there's an emergency. We don't breathe nice, deep, and slow if there's an emergency. So it's a type of grounding skill. It's a way to check in and say, oh, I guess we're okay, and allows that front part of the brain to come back online.
That's so
more
interesting.
effectively.
That makes sense.
I remember working with the respiratory therapist with my mom. My mom had COPD and emphysema, and the therapist was trying to get my mom to realize, okay, when you're panicking, that's when you want to stop, and you want to take the time, breathe in through the nose, out through and then blow it out,
Mm-hmm.
and it was just getting into this rhythmic breathing, so that the panic of not being able to get enough air. So in a whole different, like, not from PTSD, but in a way of panic, for her
Right.
to recenter, ground, as you said, and then be able to kind of take control of that and center herself, so that she could get the air she actually needed.
Which is, I was going to say, oftentimes why you find a lot of people suggesting meditation.
Yes.
Oh yeah, being mindful.
Because that's what meditation is the basis of meditation is focusing on your breathing in and out. You count in, you count out, or you have a mantra that you count in with, and then mantra you say when you go out, and it's all breathing, allowing your body to calm down and loosen up all the tense muscles, which is why I do it quite frequently.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And there's different types of meditation. So you can do, there's all sorts of styles, but Lori also mentioned one in particular called mindfulness. And there's a lot of studies around that right now. And you can find a lot of YouTube videos on it.
Yeah.
Any of those, or guided imagery. All of those are really, really great tools to use and just good practice to have. Another piece to it that you guys are kind of alluding to is recognizing that there's a need to begin with. So like the respiratory therapist taught your mom, Lori, to recognize that she was in a panic. And in order to do that, you need to know what's going on in your body. You need to recognize at a point before you get to the point of no return.
Right.
And that's something I often teach clients, is to really go in depth on what is your body going through when you're at a 0 stress level. What is your body going through when you're at a 5 level, a 10 level? 10 is, you're off the charts and there's no coming back until it's done.
Right.
And you want to catch it before you get there, ideally. And we're not talking about just the body, but what are you thinking? What are you feeling? What are you doing at these points? And so that you have a chance to recognize it before it goes too far.
It's interesting that you say that, because I think back to, some of my out of control thoughts and feelings, and, where I was just so constantly reacting rather than, stopping to think, and gather my thoughts, and you can push yourself so far, and you don't, and it's very scary, because it's so, I think sometimes by the time I finally was able to sometimes, grasp those thoughts, kind of capture them and rein them back in, if you will, and be mindful, I would realize, wow, my brain, my heart, my body, everything was so far out there, and just totally out of control. Yeah, and very scary.
And that's something that's important too, is to understand that it's not just what you're remembering that's scary. It's what you're experiencing in your body.
Amen.
And ironically, what you're experiencing in your body is the same thing you experienced during the original trauma. So that's a piece too. I mean, trauma is a field that is so far and wide, deep and wide. I mean, it's just immense. All the things that are happening. If I would recommend that if someone has experienced a trauma or knows someone that has, there's a great book called "The Body Keeps the Score" by Bessel. Now I'm not going to be able to do it. I'm not going to be able to say his name now. But he went through and studied all the different ways that trauma affects our brain, both and how we think, but also the structures themselves within our brain. That's how come a part of the reason we know so much about what parts of the brain, like the amygdala, are impacted during a trauma. So that's definitely a book I'd recommend to read.
I was thinking not long ago, I had gone through an experience. Like, over the last few years, I've realized that people who raise their voice, even if they're just talking in like a group setting and they just raise their voice, whether it's to be heard or just because they're so passionate about something, I kind of realized that that was a trigger for me. It's freaked me out. And it took me a while to kind of figure it out and piece together like what was actually causing me to struggle with some people that I am around frequently. And I remember one specific person, I had actually gone to them and I had said, hey, you know, I've realized this about myself. And when you get very passionate in your discussions, when they raise their voice, it really bothers me. And I asked them, you know, if I ever tell you, you know, hey, can you kind of tone it down a little, not to like take it personally, because I you know, I like the person and, you know, they're a friend. It was just, that was one thing I noticed about them that, you know, triggered me often. And they were like, oh, you know, yeah, thanks for sharing. And, you know, I'll do my best. And a few months later, they got real passionate about something. And basically in the middle of a meeting where there's multiple people, this person started acting like that and got passionate and got very loud. And I asked this person to calm down and went off on me again. And it wasn't pretty. And I ended up crying. You know, because I was triggered. And I was like shutting down, literally. And I even said, you know, remember a couple of months ago when I asked you, you know, told you about that and asked you if I ever said anything about, you know, hey, this is triggering me. Can you calm down? That you try to. And then he, you know, later on they realized, you know, oh yeah, I'm sorry. And but it was a huge thing. We've since like worked through it and things have gotten better. It was just, that was really tough. Because that was the first time in a long time I'd had a serious trigger like that. Because I usually stay on top of it because my masks are usually pretty solid. But apparently that day I was a little more, I don't know if it was comfortable in my surroundings, so my guard was down a little less.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I think that was what it was. And it just, yeah.
I was thinking that this is a really great time to transition into what exactly it looks like to have a broken trauma mask. Because you were saying you had that mask, you usually have that mask, you know, in place, and most people can't tell. But for whatever reason, that day and in that situation, your trauma mask was broken, and you know, what does that look like? So T, what are your thoughts? What does that look like?
Well, you know, just looking at how EJ described it, you know, it sounds like at some point your what we call affect, or your emotions, sort of became really on the sleeve, so to speak. You know, like it sounded like you probably cried.
Yeah.
And did you start shaking?
Yeah.
Did you perhaps feel? Some people say they feel sweaty. Some people say they get cold sweats.
No, I didn't have that. I definitely was crying.
Did you have a hard time finding your words?
Yeah, and I felt jittery.
Yeah.
Jittery, yeah. I used to think that I was cold. And I'd feel like I was shaking. Like, and I could, my teeth would sometimes even like chatter. Like I was chilled, you know. And
absolutely.
Yeah, it was like the temperature in my body just like dropped, you know. And I'd start to stutter.
Some people will describe like their jaw will start hurting
because you're clenching it.
Headache. They may get stomach cramps. or nausea.
Nausea.
Uh,
Yeah.
Yep. Some people might describe weakness of limbs like hands and feet, or tightness. So let's think about what we talked about earlier and where that blood flow is going and not going.
Okay. Yeah.
So first of all, when you start getting that quick, fast breathing, you hyperventilate,
Yeah, blood's not pumping through the rest of through your whole body. It's just
right?
kind of
Yep.
yeah.
And it's expending a lot of energy to do that. And so all of that energy might make you get the sweats. Like you might start sweating, you might feel hot. That cold feeling kind of comes from all of the constriction happening in the blood vessels, and so you're not getting good blood flow. The stomach cramps.
Yeah.
Well, that's because your digestive system got told to cease and desist all activity.
That's interesting.
Or to, just let's go take care of business now because we need the digestive system empty.
Yeah, that's the waves of nausea that I feel. Like it's like, ooh.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then stuttering and not being able to find your words. Remember we talked about the Broca's area. It's not getting the blood flow it needs, so you're not able to get what little thought you do have to your mouth.
Wow. Yeah. Can't find the words.
And because you don't have a lot of really coherent thought when you're at the extreme end of this, like I said, that's what little thought you have, because there's not a lot happening in that area. All and usually your thoughts are going to be around things like, I need to escape, I need to this just needs to stop, whatever it takes. The thoughts tend to be in those type of categories. And then the feelings and emotions are panic and anxiety and fear. Sometimes anger will come up during these times. So that's what it's like to go through all of that. Now, how it looks on the outside is what you guys described. So if you see someone who's in this space, they may be crying and you're looking around like, why are they crying right now? They may be pacing. They may be
laughing.
Laughing. Oh, I'm a laugher.
Well, the sun is too.
And I'll crack inappropriate jokes, whatever it takes, because the pressure, I can't stand the pressure. And so that's my way of venting that pressure, is cracking those jokes.
Yes.
And laughing.
Oh, interesting.
Cussing isn't joking and laughing too?
Yeah, it kind of is. I don't know.
Well, yeah, I mean, it is. You get that, what's it called? It's not it's a sense of humor, but it's like that kind of raw
sarcasm.
Yes, raw is a great word.
Yeah, kind of. Which sometimes that's when your most truest emotions and feelings come out.
Mm-hmm.
Which sometimes not always what you want to share.
Right.
Amen to
well,
that.
Here's the thing: is that no one is singular. We're complex creatures. We can have more than one feeling. So when we're in that space, only one kind of feeling is going out, and there's no context.
Right.
And so that can be really confusing. And then when we come down off that place of panic and whatnot, then there's often embarrassment and shame, because that's not how we behave.
Right.
That's not true to who we
Right.
are. And people just saw the mask.
And I think that's what bothered me too, was in this situation, was I was in amongst friends who knew me, had known me for a few years, but I had never been that weak I had never been that vulnerable around them before. I won't say weak, because showing emotion is not weak.
Good catch.
But it was like fearfully, I was like worried about how they were seeing me.
Yes.
Just because I had never shown that to them before, because as a mask, I had it usually pretty under control. I knew what my triggers were. I avoided my triggers, and I sought, advice or just talked it out or vented with people when I was struggling. Yeah, so I think a lot of it was kind of how are they seeing me now? Because now they're seeing this.
Right.
So that, I think, caused me to be more emotional too.
Yes.
I was thinking in the
nothing like
you. Oh, I was just thinking in the realm of healthy communication, if someone is displaying any of those things in front of us, those should be, and correct me if I'm wrong, T, but those should be our red flags that something is not right. And that's right.
Right.
And then that allows us to maybe lower our voice or back away or be calmer or, maybe even stop talking or stop communicating because we can see or realize that, it's no longer going in anywhere because the person standing in front of us isn't able to take any more in for whatever reason. And I think too, I think you've identified it, but is that we would also need to realize that it might not be something that we particularly intentionally did, or, I think when I've got, when I'm doing some of the life coaching and I'm helping friends out, and I'm sure T, you're similar in your, situation, but I try to take into account how they're reacting may not be really, and more often than not, it's not actually directed at me. It's more the situation and whatever it was that triggered them. Just so that I can identify that so that I can then not feel attacked myself or, and just kind of be able to let it go easier, if you will. Right?
Right. So imagine that when you and the boys saw those men in hard hats and orange vests. Now, and you guys responded the way you did, and now think about him seeing you guys reacting that way to him. He could have taken that very personal, right? And really, it really had nothing to do with the person under the hard hat.
It didn't.
So it is really important for us to understand that when we see someone go to this place, that what we're seeing is not their response to us, the person.
Right.
They have their inner battlefield that they just entered. That we have no idea what the rules are. They don't even know what the rules are. We have no idea what the environment, what the context is, none of that. In my experience, not just working with the clients that I work with, but I also work with troubled teen boys on top of it. And so some very things that I learned through those experiences, and also in just in life, that tend to help de-escalate. Technically, that's what you're doing. A situation is, first of all, be what you want to see.
Amen.
So be calm. Use tone of voice. We tend to want to match voice tone levels, volume level with whoever we're talking to. So we may be tempted, if they're yelling at us, to yell back. If they're not talking, to not talk to. And sometimes it's appropriate. That's okay. But it's the first step is just being aware of what your reaction to it is.
Right.
Just take note of that. Am I talking loud? Am I shutting down? Because for me personally, I can't stand conflict. I can't stand it. I will do anything to not have to deal with conflict, which the irony is what I do for a living.
Right.
And not only that, the irony of that is sometimes it turns out that I'm actually pretty good at de-escalating and pretty good at dealing with the conflict. If I have no choice, I step right into it and deal with it, and I'm fine. But that's usually where my panic comes in, is right before. So the things that I've learned to do, like I said, is stay calm. Don't take it personal. It's not about me. So that's, which was what you were just saying, Lori. But then it's also becoming aware of the
Right.
environment. If the environment is chaotic, you can encourage that person to come to a quieter place within that environment. And breathe. Obviously, breathe. And if they seem to be able to check in with what you're doing, encourage them to breathe.
Yeah.
Let's just take a breath for a second. We got this. We're okay. We can do this.
Or just like Emily did for Lori here, what Lori was sharing earlier. She recognized that Lori was struggling. Lori couldn't verbalize her feelings. Her friend noticed it, and she made it clear and helped people clear out so Lori could take a breath.
Yep.
And I think that's the most important thing. Like, for those of you who have friends that may have this problem, or you in the future, if you've ever had to deal with it, is that sometimes all we need is just somebody to be there, to just listen to us.
I really like what you said, T, about modeling. With my youngest, we received a majority of the amount of physical abuse. We all received, equal amounts of the emotional and mental abuse, but the physical abuse. So he and I had several little triggers, things that would set us off, and we could definitely set each other off because we, so one of us would trigger the other, and then we would escalate. And, I was reading a parenting book called Love and Logic. And I was like, okay, how do I use this so that I can communicate better with my youngest? Because it for a time, it seemed like every time we spoke with one another, one of us was setting the other one off. It was like we could not get past that. And it wasn't until I was able to stop, slow down, breathe. And then it was like I could see it, literally like the air would go out of him, and all of that tension and all that was building, getting ready for the next argument with me, getting ready for the next, punchline, if you will. And it was amazing when I modeled just stopping, breathing, coming down out of the rafters, so to speak, and trying to, like, okay, how do we get ourselves out of this scenario? So I really like that modeling scenario that you brought up, because I think that's definitely what worked for my youngest son and I.
Absolutely.
That makes me think of when I was a kid. I used to watch Family Matters with Urkel. And there was a scene where the Winslow, the husband, had gone to a counselor or something, and he had this like mantra that they taught him, and it was like 3, 2, 1, 1, 2, 3. What in the heck is bothering me? And he was told to repeat that when he was getting stressed.
I like that.
But yeah, I think in the episode it ended up turning out that the person was a quack, but it was just. But I think about that, and I was like, simple things like that. Like, if we can help help our friends learn things like that, like learn, like you said, breathing, mirroring them, just helping them to, like, I don't know, zone in on something for a second and kind of come back to the ground instead of like flying off the handle.
One of
Flipping the
my
lid.
favorite grounding skills to teach is called 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And what it is you look for 5 things you can see, 4 things you can hear, 3 things you can smell, 2 things you can touch, and 1 thing you can taste. And my joke always is I always put taste as just one thing because you don't want to go around licking things. So, and it usually gets the laugh from my clients. So, but it doesn't matter what order you do it in. You're just using your 5 senses, and it's a great way to kind of bring yourself back to center. Another quick and easy ones are, find me, name off 4 blue things you see, and just as simple as that. Could be good, or good grounding techniques.
I like it. Nice and simple.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think this kind of brings us into our last little segment. So we're talking about how we respond to people with broken trauma masks, and we did. But I was thinking that what about some of those masks that become permanent parts of the victimized folks? So they're a little less easy to recognize. The permanent walls we put up, or that hand that constantly goes out to keep others away. I'm currently dealing with one of the biggest masks I've ever worn, which is, my body, making it look a certain way because I felt like that was going to, and most people didn't recognize that mask. So what do you do kind of in that scenario where someone's so traumatized that there's this kind of permanent mask in place that they might not even know exists?
Well, I think my simplest answer is if it works. So and what that boils down to, so in order to be diagnosed with a disorder in the DSM-5, one of the final things almost every disorder says that is a criteria that has to be met are any of these symptoms interfering with this person's daily life, basically. So are they able to go to work? Are they able to have some friend or family or some sort of relationship? And are they distressed if they can't? Does it bother them if they can't? So is it getting in the way of their daily life? Now, you may think it's not healthy, but it's not really our place to determine what's healthy for each individual person. True. So there's that. But then there's the flip side of that is sometimes it does affect you. So let's say I have a coworker who cannot take direction, and it's my job to give them direction, but they can't take direction. Right. That's kind of a problem. Right. So it does interfere with their job. And so at that point, but then again, then we have to question, is it my place to be the one to make that change? What am I to do about it?
Interesting.
And it sort of depends. So I guess if you had like a specific example, I might be able to give an easier answer to that.
It's interesting that you said, if it's working or if it's not broken, are they still functioning, And I was thinking specifically about myself, my particular mask really did do its job. It did protect me. It did keep people at bay, and it wasn't until it began shutting down my own body or making things not possible that I could actually really identify how severe that, that mask was actually hurting me, you know. And you're right.
Right.
I had to come to that realization on my own. So I guess I really did kind of answer my own question in that we do have to have some self-discovery, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, thinking about that scenario as a whole kind of made me think of a saying. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, we just do our best in communicating with others. We do our best in interacting with others with the compassion and empathy. We don't always know what the other person's story is. And we think we see one thing, and this is something I commonly deal with my clients, is they do really struggle in their daily life with things as simple as being able to communicate with other professionals in their life and being able to receive the care or to be able to have their housing and all these different things. Those things break down because they can't communicate because they're always in that trauma brain. They're always operating in that trauma brain, and the professionals they're working with don't understand what they're seeing. They just see someone being stubborn or they see someone being overly emotional, and then they get uncomfortable and don't want to deal with this person. And so, that's what my role is to come alongside them and offer them the skills, offer them a choice of skills. But they have to be able to be the ones to pick up the tools.
I like that. I like that a lot. Because it did take me a long time to come to that realization, It wasn't that I hadn't had those thoughts or, some of my friends, hadn't brought certain things up or, but I really did have to come to that realization and be able to pick up those tools and then use them. So thanks. That was, yeah.
Another important factor, Lori, honestly, is that, like you were talking about, and I know we've had this conversation in the past. The mask that you are currently fighting with, like you said, it worked for you. It did its job, and that's what we have to remember when we're dealing with people who are in these traumas, is that these ways of doing things, at one time, it worked for them.
Right.
It was a skill they picked up and it kept them safe. Like EJ, like your OCD traits that you had, those worked for you. They did their job, but there came a point where it didn't work anymore.
Right. Yeah, I hit my brick wall, and it was just too much, and was beginning to affect my daily life.
Right.
And that's when I had to truly get help and work on it, because it was starting to affect my functionality. I couldn't work. I couldn't function. It was tough.
Yeah. Wow, this is some really serious stuff, ladies, but I'm really glad that we're doing it together and that we're being real and we're being authentic and we're getting vulnerable. And it's very encouraging. I never thought that I would be able to talk so publicly, if you will, to really dig in and be like, okay, let's examine that. Most of my life has been, let's sweep it under a rug, let's bury it, let's not even acknowledge that thing, whatever it is, exists. So I'm excited to be on this journey with the two of you, and that we're really getting in there and talking about the real stuff. So I really appreciate you ladies and your thoughts and your great empathy and compassion. So thank you.
Well, I have a couple of things to say to that. First of all, I promise you, we'll I'll keep poking those bears.
I
It's
love
what I
that you
do.
do that.
So this
Yeah.
won't be the last time. This won't be the last time that it gets serious, I'm sure. But the other piece too that I want to, for my part, leave off with something I often share with clients. I often go through the list of symptoms, whether it's PTSD, depression, anxiety, whatever. And one of the things I see on my clients' faces as we're doing that is this sort of awe, relief, and release. And what I always wrap it up with saying is, as we mark off all their symptoms, and I look at them, I'm like, do you know why I know to ask those questions, or why I have these list of symptoms, and why I know that you're going to endorse a lot of these symptoms? It's because others have experienced the same thing you have, and we have talked to them.
Right.
You're not
And
alone.
I love that. I love that, in not that I wish trauma on anyone or, bad experiences, but I love that in what I've found the longer that I'm around is that so many of the women in my life, so many of even the men in my life, we've all experienced trauma and grief and loss and, things that, right, and stress
Right.
and we're currently living in such a time where, can you go outside without a mask? Can you do this? Can you, there's so many different things going on. And we definitely are living in some pretty stressful times. But before that, when I'm sharing my story, when I am able to open up and, most of the time that's in front of a group of, other victims or women or, but I've always been amazed with, as I share my story, someone will say, "Oh, me too. Thanks. I'm so glad you said that because I thought I was the only one," or, I didn't realize other people were going through the same thing, And it definitely is a bonding time. It's a time where we're all able to be much more compassionate and empathetic, Ideally, yes.
Ideally.
Right?
That just kind of made me think of something. And today we talked about communication and trauma, and it's kind of making me think about how right now communication is such a good topic to expand even further on down the road, because that's where I see so many issues in today's climate,
Sadly, yes.
today's world, is the breakdown of communication. We are missing the mark, and we are forgetting our empathy and our compassion. And, as a trauma therapist, I can see so many areas and avenues in the communication topic that can be explored that I think might help get us
That
back
may
on the
be
right
something
track
we
when we're
want to
talking
come back to, because I know we had kind of talked about when we were in some of our notes about this particular episode. We kind of talked about some communication styles, and we'd also talked about, when we have the inability to have that nonverbal in there with the verbal, what happens on social media, what happens with text, what happens. And I think you're really right in that we might need to come back and visit this again at some point and talk about some of those things, because we are, as a society and a community, really off track right now, and we are not succeeding at communication. We tend to be yelling at one another, and this is how I feel, and our passion and our all of these things that are affecting us are getting in the way of healthy communication. And that breaks my heart.
Right. So today we talked a lot about trauma, which of course is one of my passions, but I think coming back and talking more about the actual communication and just some identifying the issues and then posing some solutions.
I think that would be a great
really
idea.
great idea.
Maybe we can do that for the next episode. EJ? I'm like, where'd you go?
I'm gonna end with, I think I'm going to end this podcast with a scripture. 1 Peter 5:6-11. Humble yourselves, therefore, under God's mighty hand, that he may lift you up in due time. Cast all your anxiety on him, because he cares for you. Be alert and of sober mind. Your enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion looking for someone to devour. Resist him, standing firm in the faith, because you know that the family of believers throughout the world is undergoing the same kind of sufferings. And the God of all grace, who called you to his eternal glory, after you have suffered a little while, will himself restore you and make you strong, firm, and steadfast. To him be the power forever and ever. Amen.
That was beautiful.
I go to the scripture a lot just because of the anxiety part of it. But as T was talking, I was just thinking about, having, like, when she would write down the symptoms of depression or anxiety for her patients, and they would, realize, and she'd say, how do you think I knew? Because other people have gone through the same thing, and this is what they had. And I think in all of this communication, it's sometimes when we start having these breaks and a lot of the fear is the unknown.
Absolutely.
Of the fear of, I'm alone in this. And
that's great.
This is a good scripture. And for those of you who aren't Christians, whether you're not, I think you can all think, just remember that, Satan or devil or however you would like to describe him is out there, and he's trying to make your life miserable. And there's a higher power out there. I believe that, and I'm sure these ladies do too.
Absolutely.
That is taking care of us, and God is gonna take care of us. He's gonna be there, and he's gonna help us resolve things in the time that God has planned for it to be resolved.
Well said.
Thank you all so much for joining us. Again, we just wanted to give you a friendly reminder that anything discussed in this podcast is not to be used as a diagnosis or replacement for conversations with your own doctors, therapists, psychologists, or other medical professionals. This episode is available on Anchor, Spotify, Google, Apple Podcasts, and more. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram as BehindTheMaskPC, and we'll soon have all of our episodes on YouTube. You can find EJ on Twitter and Instagram as EJ8302, and T has her own YouTube channel called T's Life Lessons. If you enjoyed what you've heard so far, we'd love to hear what you think. Feel free to review us on Anchor, leave feedback on the platform you listen to us on, message us through our social media, or if you don't use social media, you can also email us at BehindTheMaskPC@gmail.com. If you did like what you've heard and would like to keep these episodes coming, you can visit anchor.fm/BehindTheMaskPC/support to monetarily help the podcast out. And on behalf of Lori, T, and myself, thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.